prominent political scientist and governance expert in the African Great Lakes region, and the CEO of the Rwanda Governance Board. He just informed me it's the one and only board of its kind globally. So he conceived and developed the Rwanda Governance Scorecard, which is one of the things you're going to share with us today. Without further ado, let me give the floor to Professor Anastase. We agreed that you would speak first, and then we would take questions collectively. I'm going to sit over there so I can actually see what you're talking about.
So
Sure. Whatever you please. Please, a warm round of applause.
Good morning. In Rwanda, it's still in the morning, so that's why I'm saying good morning. Distinguished hosts, my High Commissioner, Deje Vanessa, Director of the GCPSE, and the lecturers from this wonderful university and students. First and foremost, I wanted to thank you for inviting me, giving me this opportunity to share with Singapore stakeholders, people from here, the experience from Rwanda, but also some reflections on what we Rwandese and you people from Singapore, we share or what we are getting inspiration from you, with the hope that in the next 50 years you will have some inspirations from us also. So my talk will be, actually it's like 3 presentations in one. I'll be looking at the state of governance and public service, and in between the lines we'll see where Rwanda, where Africa can be inspired from Singapore. But don't expect me to present on Singapore, because I understand you know it better. But I will use some of the few reflections that I have captured from the global studies to probably have a kind of comparative analysis. But I will be looking at mainly 3 critical issues. One, I'll be sharing with you the Rwanda Governance Scorecard, a kind of national governance index, which we have conceived and we are developing and we are implementing, so that we inform policy, we drive reforms, and we impact development. The second part of the presentation will be looking at very critical indicators of governance globally, and looking at Singapore, at Rwanda, and at Africa, and try to have some deductions and maybe some lessons, and maybe have a clear understanding of where really Singapore can be an inspiration to the continent. And the third part, I have been asked to share with you some government, national e-government initiatives in Rwanda, so that we can have that connection, the linkage between ICT and governance towards socio-economic development. So as a lecturer, sometimes I talk too much, so I hope my moderator will make sure that I don't exceed 40 minutes as I was told. So the Rwanda at a glance. Most welcome, please. Most welcome. Those are our distinguished. Oh, sorry.
Excuse me, sir.
Thank you very much. So Rwanda at a glance, of course, known Rwanda is in Africa, in the Central Africa, bordering with DRC, Uganda, Tanzania, and Burundi. But also Rwanda is not a such big country, though bigger than Singapore, but still we can be categorized in the very same category. Only 26,000 kilometers square, with the Kigali capital. We have nearly 12 million people. We speak 3 languages, our own Kinyarwanda and French and English. So we are in that interconnection between the Francophone and the Anglophone Africa, and we are a land of opportunities. A land of opportunities simply because we have a beautiful country which is tourist-wide attractive, but also we are committed to work. With the president on the picture here, I don't know how to use this, but how do you, can this show the, oh yes, I'm fine. My president showing the way, having his hands and participating in what we call community works for collective national development, but also a beautiful country and the landscape you see. So if you want to feel good and have a nice holiday, that's you are most welcome to Rwanda. So, and gorillas, one of the, I think Rwanda, we can say it's the only one global destination if you want to see the mountain gorillas in a very safe environment. You can't find them nowhere else, only in Kigali. I mean, in Rwanda, but through Kigali. So Rwanda Governance Board, all the pieces I will be sharing with you, I have them from the Rwanda Governance Board, which I have a chance of leading. And the Rwanda Governance Board stands for the national institution that serves as one-stop center for governance matters. Our very many responsibilities are summarized here in those 5-6 points, starting from the issues of decentralization and promotion of good governance principles, issues of monitoring, in charge of monitoring governance practices and service delivery across the sectors in public, political, and civic domains. We are in charge of conducting applied research to governance, of course, to generate information for policy purposes. And you are the one in charge of documenting the homegrown initiatives and trying to assess them so that we provide policy proposals or policy advocacy around them, how we can make those homegrown solutions which have been at the forefront of pushing forward, of spearheading, of catalyzing national development in Rwanda, how can we make them producing more results than they are doing? And of course, we are in charge of registration of political parties as well as faith-based organizations and NGOs. And of recent, we are in charge of coordination of media policy, including spearheading media reforms that are undergoing in the country. And finally, we are tasked to do kind of strategic engagements with national and international stakeholders interested in our governance structures and systems. So one of the products we use to do our work is the Rwanda Governance Scorecard, as I have indicated. Last year, we have produced the 2nd edition of that instrument, and the main objective of this Rwanda Governance Board, Rwanda Governance Scorecard, is basically to generate reliable and credible data on governance. We are looking at it as a practical tool to drive policy reforms, and we are using it, of course, to generate knowledge, but also to have this knowledge shared with the global world. So how is it made? What are its indicators? This table indicates, you can see, is structured around 8 key indicators, which are globally known, such as rule of law, political rights and civil liberties, participation and inclusiveness, safety and security, investing in people, control of corruption, accountability and transparency, quality of service delivery, economic and corporate governance. Those are the key 8 indicators we look at, and each of them is made up of sub-indicators and sub-sub-indicators. In most of the cases, what we measure is really sub-sub-indicators, but you aggregate them to have sub-indicators, and aggregating sub-indicators, you get each indicator's score. So that's how it's structured. So we have about 35 sub-indicators and 143 sub-indicators. And of course, it's made of those. The data are coming from three sources. Some are from the surveys, people-centered surveys. Others are from hard data, and others are from expert surveys. So when you look at the 8 indicators as I have shared with you, and look at the 2012 Rwanda Governance Scorecard, you find that 4 out of 8 indicators, the scores are green. Our scoring is that above 75%, we consider that it's okay. That's where we give green. Between 50% and 75%, that's a yellow. And below, between 25 and 50, that's amber. And if it's below 25, we give a red card. So out of 8 indicators, 4 are green, other 4 are yellow. Out of 35 sub-indicators, 23 are green, 12 are yellow. Out of 143 sub-indicators, 78 are green, 49 yellow, 12 amber, and 4 are in red. So I have some few copies which I will share with the school if you want to put it in your library. So that's how it looked like, but all in all, the whole, that is the scorecard, but of course it's published, its real form looks, it's a very small booklet which is easy to read. That's like this, easy to read. But what we are looking at this time is this kind of scorecard where you have each of the indicators with the sub-indicators and their scores, but at the end you have the percentage of the indicators. If you go, for instance, for the rule of law, you see the overall score is 73.37%, and you can look at which sub-indicators we measure and what are their scores. And in this logic, all sub-indicators are equal. There's no bigger sub-indicator than others. All are equal. So you can go to political rights and civil liberties and check what we measure and have also the overall score. You can go to safety and security, very same. Safety and security, this is the only one, I think there are 2, indicator where all sub-indicators, the indicator is green, but also all sub-indicators are green. Same is with investing in people, where we consider education and health sectors, but when you look at the scores, of course, safety and security tops other indicators, where the overall score reaches 91.36. So all in all, and you can look at the last economic and corporate governance. Maybe I can talk a little bit more on this. In the first edition, this indicator was called differently with a different set of indicators. We looked at actually private sector promotion, investment promotion, and private sector advocacy. So what we found was that on one hand, all the indicators and sub-indicators were very green and very positive, but on another hand, you could find in our socio-economic sector a lot of challenges. So we understood that probably what we are measuring is not reflecting necessarily the reality in the country. So we changed it to capture the macroeconomic indicators, which are hard data, but also to look at the SMEs, the development and cross-border trade, where we have a lot of challenges in terms of being able to move and have scoring above 75%. So the overall score is is nearly 75%, a bit below what we had the previous year, but the only difference being that here we really put very tough indicators and very difficult to satisfy. And when we try to look at the whole scorecard and all the indicators and sub-indicators, so compared even to the previous one, we could see which areas have been radically improved. So the good improvement, we considered 5% of growth in the indicator. So 11 out of 35 sub-indicators have grown in 1 year above 5%. As you can see, the access to legal aid has been the most improving indicator, with 25% of increase, simply because in our first edition, of course, when we produce such a tool, it is followed with a set of recommendations, policy options. And in our first publication, the rule of law was the last. Rule of law was the last, and actually access to legal aid was in the amber color. So when we formulated a number of recommendations, which the justice sector and the judiciary took, actually it is the Ministry of Justice mainly, they took those recommendations, they implemented automatically, it changed their scoring. So we are happy to see that the least scoring in the first scorecard has showed the best improvement in the second one, though it is not the best scoring, but at least it has showed the best improvement. So, and the other improvement can be seen there almost in all 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In all 6 indicators, 6 out of 8 indicators have known sub-indicators which happen to score above 5%. The second part of and for the another very important point on the governance scorecard. So this instrument has been engineered from within, though we are a autonomous public institution, but it has been engineered from ourselves. When we produced it, it wasn't a binding document because it wasn't a government. It is not a government document. But for the second one, when we produced it and we shared with the stakeholders, we were surprised because the government, the Prime Minister himself, took the responsibility of enforcing the implementation of the recommendations, because they found it contains a lot of policy proposals that can help change where change is needed. So it means it has very kind of in such a short time become, the second edition has now become a kind of binding document for the government institutions, by the commitment of the Prime Minister saying those recommendations, actually when you published it, even some of them have been starting to be implemented. Those which are not yet in the process of implementation, at the end of the year, that means by June this year, it will have to be evaluated and monitored properly, and the report submitted to the Prime Minister showing how those proposed options have been put in place. Public service reforms. This was another point I wanted to just shed some little lights. But the sector has gone, public service in Rwanda has changed drastically since 1994. So 20 years after, if you look at it, you see a lot of changes. Because there are too many, actually I took only one example. I will be looking at decentralization, because here we are talking about the whole structure that is influencing actually many things in the country. So, but before that, you know that this year is Rwanda's 20 years anniversary of genocide. And while preparing this presentation, I thought it would be good to just to share some principles looking at those 20 years looking back and trying to put into context of that public service reforms and look at the milestone. So in those 20 years, you can actually put them into 2 decades, 2 different decades. Almost the first decade, 94, 2003, we had a post-genocide transition. We're in a transitional phase, and it was an institutional transition. During that period, those who know Rwanda might remember, we had to struggle for negative peace. That was the driving force. How can we ensure stability? How can we ensure the negative peace? How can we ensure that violence has stopped? How can we ensure minimum security across our borders? How can we reduce security threats coming from our neighborhoods? How can we have refugees returning home? So that was the main focus. We looked at state apparatus capabilities because the state was completely down. The levels of poverty and social mistrust were very high, but that is when we instituted the National Unity and Reconciliation Commission. Basically, Rwanda was focused on security matters, basic human needs, and I don't want to use the term basic, but making sure that the state is alive. But it wasn't yet time to talk about efficiency in public reforms and in other governance matters beyond security and social cohesion. But the second decade, after the transition, 2003, and moving forward towards 20, so the focus is now about peace, positive peace. And if you look at the system, you understand 3 driving forces. We have public service reform around institutional development to drive those reforms. You will have a huge investment, interest, and attention of objectives, which I think to some extent can be compared to what I think in Singapore is called dynamic governance, though 90%, but you can't have over 50% of seats in a cabinet. You can win whatever percentage, but a political party with, the president of the lower chamber parliament can't come from the very same option, political option, as the president of the republic, simply because the parliament, the lower chamber has that responsibility of oversight responsibility over the cabinet. So those are the arrangements. The second very critical constitutional provision is about democracy and democratic governance. Confrontational politics, what others call ethnic politics, those are out. You can't form a political party in Rwanda that has a religious or ethnic connotation. You can't call Islamic political party. It will be unconstitutional, so in our country. So we go consensus, dialogue, and power sharing. Actually, those efforts have been sustained because of that political system we have put in place. And finally, in that public service reforms, there is a kind of institutional consolidation starting, and I think they have to do with Singapore. Because we've seen in the last 7-8 years a trend of consolidating institutions with similar missions into one, which you call boards. The first born of that kind of trend was the Rwanda Development Board, and the last born is the Rwanda Governance Board. So I think Rwanda Governance Board Rwanda Development Board put together, was created in 2006-07, and I think the inspiration came from Singapore, and the idea was to put institution dealing with investment, tourism, IT, domain that can create more resources and more development, including agriculture and capacity, even some part of environment issues. Altogether, I think there were 7 institutions. They were put together, and that's when the Rwanda Development Board was born. And as of today, as you have seen in the Rwanda Governance Board, as I shared with you, we combined a number of institutions and services from different ministries. At least from the Rwanda Governance Board, we had 2 institutions standing alone, but also services that were scattered in the Prime Minister's office. That's where the media docket was. In the Ministry of Justice, that's where the regulation of civil society and churches was. The Ministry of Local Administration, that's where the registration of political parties and registration of NGOs, that's where it was located. And plus other governance-related issues which were scattered but not fixed anywhere, such as monitoring the efficiency of institution, governance practices, and all that. So that for me, and of course, all this institutional setup has helped to move forward with the homegrown solutions that have really, you can see, they speak for themselves. Whether you are talking about justice sector with the Gacaca courts, whether you are talking about Umuganda or Imihigo in the public service, and they are elsewhere. We have counted about 17 such homegrown initiatives, and in some cases, I'll give you one case in the education sector where we have also gone through a tremendous change. If you go back 7 years ago, the transition from primary to secondary, our kids below 30% would move from primary to secondary. But with the 9 years basic education framework, we've gone to 100% within 3 years. So in terms of budget, it was impossible, even from the donors' perspective, it was impossible to achieve. That was something they were saying, maybe it will take 40 years or something like that. But then, because they were looking at how much do you need to invest to construct just one school, leave alone the issues of human resources and skills, which actually could be found even in neighboring countries and all that. But what was done, the 9-year basic education was put in the homegrown solutions. And after 3 years, looking at the schools that were constructed, 67% came from the people, mobilizing the people for themselves, having the school nearby. 67% of the budget, if you translate everything into money. 1.5% came from the donors, and about 32 came from the government. That is one of the areas where people have shown their capacity. Now, this is the decentralization I wanted to share. That's in terms of policy, that is how it was set, the setup of decentralization. When we started decentralization, our delivery system was like this. Every services, I don't know if you read it, was delivered at central government, mostly. If you want an ID at some time back, you needed a minister to sign it or a prefect. And no services were delivered at sector and cell level. That's when we started decentralization, we moved towards having at least low services delivered or none at the central government level, but at least at the province level. When we ended the first phase, we started the second phase of decentralization, most of the services the people need were delivered at district level. The second phase of decentralization pushed us towards having them delivered at sector level. That is our aim, such a structure by the end of 2015-2016. Now, if you look at what we had here, because I have data of this, what we found is actually that decentralization of services went faster than decentralization of finances. Because in 96% of document related and small issues related to, that people need were delivered at sector and cell level, 96%, not even at district. In terms of the fiscal decentralization, our budget now, I think almost 30% goes directly to districts. So which indicates that actually, but where we are still struggling to move faster is the own revenue generation by the district to be able to support their own planning and all that. Now, this is probably the area where we could look at Singapore, Rwanda, and Africa. I used one or maybe two perspectives from the World Bank, from the Transparency International, the World Bank with the doing business, but also the World Bank with the government effectiveness, which I will share later on. Here you can, speaking in Singapore, strong leadership, pro-business, and a leadership that is committed to fight corruption. I think there is no better place where you can say it loud globally than in Singapore. So what we are going through, what we are emphasizing in our own governance is those two elements. Have governance structures that are supporting, conducive for business, but at the very same time that are inhibiting corruption and corruption tendencies. In Africa, we recognize that trade, investment, and not aid are the pillars of development. In that, those words of His Excellency the President of the Republic, there is also that determination towards self-reliance. Although Rwanda is now using about 40% of our needs, our budgetary needs are coming from our donors. So if you compare with even in 10 years, I think we are below 30% of own revenues. But we believe that maybe in 10, 15, 20 years to come, we can completely graduate from that, which is not an impediment to international cooperation, but it's an expression of commitment, willingness to be able to be self-reliant, to live our lives, and to move forward. So the two graphs indicates with a number of other countries, African countries, but even Singapore, and I mean, if you go to doing business, you see Singapore as #1 globally, but we too are not doing badly. 32nd globally, that's the ranking of Rwanda. Only Mauritius on the continent is still ahead of us. But if you go back like 7 years, you will find Rwanda was even behind Kenya. 7 years. So in 7 years, we have been able to move ahead of nearly 100 countries in terms of the way we do business, the way we are reforming in business areas. And we are ranked the best reformer globally. Same as there is a correlation between control of corruption, of course, and doing the business, because even here you see, I think in Africa, one of the best will be Botswana, but Rwanda will be among the top 5 on the continent, if not second. And again, you will see Singapore, the high levels of anti-corruption policies will definitely be incentives, if not foundational, for doing business. Let's move to the other indicator, this one also coming from the World Bank, which I consider to be actually one of the most comprehensive governance index, because it puts together a lot of information. The worldwide governance indicators of last year, I didn't want to put other countries, but what I did was to try to look at Singapore and Rwanda and their scores, but also compare with the Africa's regional economic communities. So you recognize the of activities the government decided to implement. If you go to Singapore, compared to the average of what we globally call the Asian type, we are nearby. At least now we can say that we are having the very same levels of control of corruption as the lower cluster of Asian tigers. which I think is a good achievement. Now, in my last 5 to 7 minutes, I will go very quickly to the national e-government initiatives in Rwanda. There are very many, and the purpose is not only to fast track public service, quality service delivery, but also some services are made accessible to the people. Indeed, they enhance, in our policy framework, they are meant, the e-government initiatives, they are meant to enhance transparency and accountability, but also to catalyze conducive environment for business. So that is the policy framework as it is made. What I wanted to emphasize here is even by definition, when you start something in IT, it is not left and terminated. You can see the enabling environment, it will continue. We started it with the Vision 2020, and we defined four phases of our national information communication infrastructure, whereby we started by the environment setting, infrastructure development, service sector development, and then so that we can achieve the knowledge-based economy, which is one of our sub-pillar actually in the Vision of 2020. The aim is to make Rwanda a knowledge-based economy. So as you can see, while we started earlier issues of environment and infrastructure, but we will continue emphasizing them even when we will be making the fourth NIKI plan. In terms of infrastructure, I'm not an IT person, but at least I'm a user. Both of us are users. So you need the local government authorities. So they were obliged to come maybe twice a week, seeing them coming around Kigali, but then they can't deliver. Now that's when it was decided in the National Leadership Retreat that they be connected through video conferences. So no more calls of mayors of districts to Kigali. They do the meetings, they fix an hour and they do things. And for many years our cabinet has been paper-free. You can't go to the cabinet administered with those dossiers and that's done. You send earlier, they are on your laptops, and the setting is done. Also, and I saw it here also in Singapore, I think that's where we got it from. Rwandese going outside the country on the airport, you don't need to bring in a passport and have them stamped and all that. You just, myself, that's how I do. So you look smart and you move and they say, no, maybe I have moved. So those services are there around. Now I think we are trying to make it regional. There is a process called the tripartite initiative between Rwanda, Uganda, and Kenya. The main area of focus among the three presidents, and we think the South Sudan and probably Burundi, and at a later stage, hopefully Tanzania would join. But the main issue is about infrastructure, connecting electricity, interconnectivity in electricity, making sure that you don't do the customs 3 times, because you pass through Mombasa, you do it once, it's done. You can handle your business in Mombasa while being in Kigali, and you can travel with your ID and move freely in those weekends. Starting from 1st of this year, the ID is operational. ID, or like in Uganda where they don't have those smart IDs, students can use student cards or other official documents, that identity documents. The other area where reforms have gone very far, I think I have been very talkative, is in public service management. IFMS is in place, IPPS. IFMS is Integrated Financial Management Information System. So the payments, a public servant in a remote area, probably talking about it in Singapore, I don't think it would be good to talk about how it was before, because we are trying to do how you are doing. So before, if you want a payment, you fill the papers, you take to the banks, and you do this and that. Now it's off. Wherever you are, you can go into the system. It's interconnected with the Minecofin, and you do your payments, you approve everything, and you can see. Same as for those those IFMS, it also concerns the commercial banks. But IPPIS, it is for the, it is called Integrated Payroll, Public Payroll Information System. So in some countries, you can have, how do they call them? Ghost? Yes. But in our case, it's impossible because everything is computerized. So you don't have to run with your checks and your papers and your list of payments. It is in the system. Even if you are a contractor or you are a permanent staff, it's in the system managed by the Ministry of Public Service, and then you can handle in your office. All of us, by 25th of every month, we have been paid. So everybody can be happy of this, at least in speeding the payments. So at the end, they have proper records, but it has helped to reduce, drastically reduce maternal mortality from, I think, 10 years ago. In 2000, our records was over 1,000 in 100,000. Now our records is about 2010. They were the rate was 383 in 100,000. When it comes to under 5 mortality, it has been also reduced because those health workers, they are also permanently trained. In the agriculture, we still have over, I'm done, my last minute, over 80% are working still in agriculture. The e-Soko, Soko in our language, it means market, e-market. So people can know the prices of so and so left and right. And as you can see, it has even won an international technology in the government award in 2011. This is the conclusion. Probably the conclusion will be discussion, but let's conclude saying that Singapore, we look at it as a world class in control of corruption, accountability, and efficiency, and Rwanda is just trying to put its feet in yours. We're in that work. Your governance of system, your system of governance has taken you from the third to the first world, from the third to the first world in a few decades. Ours, focusing on governance for production, has helped us to triple our GDP per capita in 10 years, from 2002 to 2012, from $206, I think, to $644. But when you look at it comprehensively, we think that leadership has a lot to do with that. The leadership in Rwanda has been at the heart, at the center, and leadership has been at the center of engineering the homegrown solutions, and both of the two, they are really the drivers of change, of positive change. And we can say that the Rwanda's perspective shows that good governance, it's both an analysis of the context, but also I think a conviction from the leadership that good governance combined with So we have enough time. So there are indicators that are hard. Basically, if you want to know how many jobs were created, because those are the things we are also looking at in the course of that year, compared to the target you have, so that you can score, then you have to get information across those ministries. So you have a number of data providers from ministries, from agencies, from different institutions, but also, as I said, we also conduct the expert surveys on perception-based sub-indicators. For instance, if you talk about the political space, if we talk about the freedom of media, if we talk about vibrance of civil society, civil society is the best placed to do that self-assessment. So we just commission them. This is one of those think tanks in the civil society. They do their work, and they give us their findings. It says we are red, we are green, we are so and so, and that is what we go. But we discuss with them the methodology, so that, because not everybody is a researcher. Also, we use some published works which we know that they are standards, that they are good. Some question in the participation in political rights and civil liberties, we have used such reports, but coming again from those non-governmental institutions. But if there is a survey that a given ministry conducts on a regular basis or institution, that one we can also consider as a data source. And we have one basic survey, actually, which one governance scorecard. We take benefits of other mechanisms or other studies, annual studies we have. We have something called Citizen Report Card. Every year, we commission that study to show us how people are appreciating services and institutions, and from there we extract if it comes to perception. But most of I can say between 60 and 70% of our data are hard, and between 30 and 40 will be either expert or perception based. Pockets were putting in money, even the poor people. But what happened in one district, someone living with, how do you call, Abaumzi, High Commissioner, very, very, very poor people they are making some kind of, you can make some kind of, traditional stuff from the, oh my goodness, I don't get the term. Anyway, so that poor person was making, like, let's say we're making things like this, and that person decided that I will make 2, and those 2, I will sell them, and all the money we get from it, I put in Agachiro. And each of them was costing maybe $500, $1. And then he didn't take, because the person didn't have money. So he took those stuff to the district, and they were collecting money. He put there, that's my contribution to that Agachiro, because that's all I have. And then I don't know how the people said, oh, why don't we do auction with this? Because we will not put this in the bank of the Minister of Finance in Megachi. Let's do auction. Who gives? And ultimately, the stuff ended up costing $600, from $2 to $600. But the most impressive was that they wanted to take $2 from those $600 and they give the rest to that poor man. And the poor man refused. He said, I have never in my life had $10, $20 in my hands. But all those 2, I have decided they go to my country. So he refused to take the difference, because for him, that stuff was designated for his country. And that was a heavy lesson. Actually, we say he did beat all of us, because he has given all he had for his country. We are talking about 10%, maybe 5, maybe. But he has said, all I have given to my country. So that's why I think even resilience is one very important. So for the key success from Samuel, thank you very much for your appreciation. We look forward to see you coming back and see where if we are where you left us, or if you have moved seriously. So, but the key factors, I think, we can say even there are many, but for me, I put in three categories. The key factor number one is about leadership and its commitment to development, to driving reforms, and its consistency, its innovativeness, leadership. I put it at the center. The key factor number two, I'll look at the systems which I put in under, can call it transformational governance, because it is also about systems you put in place and how they are coherent and how do you make them working. And that transformational governance brings in something that is very important. It brings in the homegrown solutions. And the homegrown solutions, there is no, in some of the sectors, there is nothing else you can do to replace what you have gotten from homegrown solutions. And the homegrown solutions they have brought in Rwanda, if you say, we want to do this, even if you say you want to go to the moon, the first reflex is not people will say, we can't achieve it. No, that one is past. We are no longer saying, this is impossible. The impossible is if you say, we want this, we know it will be difficult. We know it maybe you might not get there, but you will not, the first reaction is, let's go. So that mobilization that comes from the heart, I think is, it is even very new in our own doing business as a society. It's very new. It comes with that leadership that actually, maybe we had it, but it was silent. But it comes and it is being tagged now as the Rwandan spirit. Because we had challenges of genocide. Everybody was saying there is no way out. We try to move on and we find, with challenges, but we find our way, and now we can say at least we have handled the justice issues. The school issues, so the homegrown solutions, whatever is impossible, just put it in the hands of the people and they will do it. And the last one is that one, the resilience of the people, which goes actually, makes the mixture of the three, leadership, systems, and people, it makes, it's a triangle that makes things for me happen. Thank you. I hope I didn't forget anybody.
We have time for perhaps one or two more questions. We're slightly running out of time, but why not? High Commissioner, and then
allow
yes.
me, I just want
Sure.
to thank Professor Shaka and add on